Okay, good morning everybody. So we're going to be learning this morning. I want to thank Dr. Yossi Simpson who's sponsoring the Le'il Nishmas Rav Shimon Aaron Ben Rav Eliyahu. His father, whose yahrzeit will be this Friday on Zion Shvat. Our limud should be in Nishmas. Thank you for participating in this public learning of Torah together. Also, our limud will be L'Refua Gedalia Yitzhak Ben Sarah. David's father, who's learning we should be L'Refua Shlema, and also Le'ilui Nishmas Shena Bas Mordechai. That's my Baba, whose yahrzeit is on Daled Shvat. I think we should be Nishmasa. So the Shvat Debate. This is a very interesting topic. As it happens, this topic is going to expand our consciousness. So we have to be ready just for an expansion in breadth and depth of what we've ever thought about, and I think it will live up to its expectations. So here's how it goes. Let's talk a little bit about Shvat for a moment. Shvat is an interesting month in the fact that there is a debate about Shvat. When we talk to our children, what is the primary function of Shvat? Shvat, the Rosh Chodesh for Ilanos. As it happens, not so simple. Let's take a quick look over here. Here's what the Mishnah says in Rosh Hashanah. First Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah. Mishnah tells us, Arba Rosh Hashanim Haim. There are 4 days which are considered Rosh Hashanah. Be'echad b'Nisan Rosh Hashanah leMelachim. Okay, we're going to regard him. So on the 1st of Nisan is when the year starts counting for kings. So that's when you say it is the 3rd year to King X, Y, Z. That's on Be'echad Be'elul Rosh Hashanah leMaiser Behema. The 1st of Elul is the Rosh Hashanah for tithing animals, meaning to say animals born in a particular year. There has to be a cutoff. That's the tax date for Maiser. Maiser Behema. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, Oimrim, Be'echad B'Tishrei, it is on the 1st of Tishrei. Be'echad B'Tishrei Rosh Hashanah L'Shanim, L'Shmitim, L'Yavros, L'Tias, L'Yirakos. And then on Rosh Hashanah, on the 1st of Tishrei, it is Rosh Hashanah for all the Shemitah cycles and Yovel cycles. That's the cutoff point. And comes back to us, Be'echad B'Shvat Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan, K'divrei Beis Shammai. The yeshiva of Shammai's founding would say that when is the Rosh Chodesh for Ilan? Yesterday, Rosh Chodesh Shvat. However, Beis Hillel Oimrim B'Chamisha Asar Boy. Hillel was the one who would say it would be on Tu B'Shvat, on the 15th of Shvat. Fascinating. So there's a debate as to when the demarcation of Tu B'Shvat essentially is. That's unfair, oxymoron. There's a demarcation when the Rosh Chodesh or the Rosh Hashanah for Ilanos actually is. When do we go out there? When does the JNF make their appeal? When do we start digging in the backyard? All is a very big debate. Happens to be we paskin like Beis Hillel, so it's Tu B'Shvat. But there is another side to the coin, and that is Beis Shammai. And the question that stands in front of us is there a way to make sense of this machlokes? Is there a bigger machlokes at stake over here rather than simply dates? That's the question that's at hand. So rather than looking at this in a micro perspective and saying, okay, let's try to pull apart, and the Gemara doesn't after you've done it in Rosh Hashanah, try to pull this apart and say, well, maybe it's about the end of the rain cycle and the beginning of the sap flowing and all the different options that we have. Maybe there's something bigger. Could we say there's something bigger that's at stake over here? So this is what the question is at hand. Whenever we pose such a question about Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, you know what happens? People say the following. I know what the machlokes is about Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. The machlokes of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai Beis Shammai was this big machmir, right? He had a short temper. Remember the story about this? The Geru comes in the 1 foot and he chases him away. Beis Shammai was much more of a makbid person. So therefore, all his opinions are much more machmir. That's what we generally say about Beis Shammai. And Beis Hillel is more easygoing about things, and that's why he's usually more makil, and that's why it expresses itself in the stories. The problem is if that's a bit of a superficial way of looking at things for a number of reasons. Number one is, not all cases is Beis Shammai machmir. There are many cases where Beis Shammai is in fact makil. Happens to be in a certain area he's always machmir. We're going to get to why that is. But in general, it's not true that Beis Shammai is always machmir. Number two, when you go to Pirkei Avos and you see what is the identity of each person, Pirkei Avos is teachings that were said by particular people. Why was it that certain sayings were attributed to particular people? Meaning, what's the point? Meaning, weren't those ethics predominant? We'll call it, across history. Why were those people once attributed with that?
They emanated. They
They represented that statement. You know what the statement of Rabbi Shammai was? Of Shammai himself was? What's the statement of Shammai in Pirkei Avos? What is the statement which exemplifies who he was, how he acted, what he saw when he looked in the mirror? What was the statement of Beis Shammai? Anybody know? Or Shammai himself, before Beis Shammai? So the statement is that in Perek Aleph Mishnah Tesvav it says, Shammai Omer, Asay Torah Schal Kevar, make your Torah fixed, good. Emor Ma'at V'asay Harbe, do a little, say a little and do a lot. Behev Makabel is Kol Adam to save upon him Yafais. Receive everybody with a pleasant face. Right, what was that? Sounds like the reflection of the Birkas Yaakov. Meaning to say, at the end of the day, Beis Shammai was the person. What did he exemplify? He exemplified a countenance which welcomed everybody. You know, to create a straw man and say, you know, he was this person who was, you know, more makpid and, you know, that was why he was more machmer. It's not fair. It's not true. There has to be something bigger than that. So here's what we're going to do. What we're going to try to do is explore across the board a number of cases where Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argue. And remember, by the way, Beis and Beis means to say the yeshivas which were established after their lifetime. The reason why that's significant is for the following reason. Is that Shammai and Hillel themselves were not actually technically what are called Tanaim. Tanaim are usually the teachers in the Mishnah. Shammai and Hillel were an important crux, an important hinge in Jewish history. They were into a period called Zugos, the pairs. Here's how it worked. After Bayis Rishon was destroyed, all the Jews, or most of the Jews, went down to Babylonia into exile. They remained there under the Persians. They returned to Israel under the control of Anshe Knesset Agdola. Ezra HaSofer, Mordechai was part of this. Nehemiah, Chagai, Zachariah, Malachi, all the last prophets, beginning of the leadership, became under Anshe Knesset Agdola. They didn't have a king. They couldn't have a king. Why couldn't they have a king? Because they were Persian subjects, right? Persians were not exactly interested in having, any cessations from the Union at that point in time. So what happened is they had their own, we'll call it governors under Persia, and at that point in time, they had leadership. Now, interestingly enough, after Anshe Knesset Agdola ceased to be, there was a single control of the generation for 5 straight generations, and those were called Zugos. They were pairs, which means to say the entire Jewish leadership was under the control of 2 people. One was an Av based in, and one was a Nos. Okay? Those were the 2 people. And those were the controlling people of those 5 generations. There was centralized leadership, which means to say there was no machlokas. Whenever there was a debate about something, it was voted upon, and it was unilateral. There was one way to do things. There wasn't machlokas. Machlokas only started developing at the end of the Zugos. Who was the last of the Zugos? Hillel and Shammai. Hillel and Shammai were the last 2 before the Tanaim period expanded, and Machlokas developed. There's very many reasons why Machlokas developed, and Machlokas wasn't voted upon by the times of Hillel and Shammai. But be it as it may, it's important to know that the difference between Hillel and Shammai is when Machlokas started being preserved, and Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai was when that started proliferating. Okay, so this is an important juncture in Jewish history to be able to understand. Let's try to express it in the following terms. So let's take a look at some Machlokas then. Here we go. Okay. So let's take 5 particular cases. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to do a cursory investigation of 5 particular cases across Shas, try to just note what they are, and then come back at the end and say, is there something which binds them together? Is there something which holds any, maybe a common theme throughout? Okay, so let's start at the beginning. First debate, let's start over here. The bracha on Havdalah. Here we go. The Mishnah in Brachas says the following. There's many disputes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai as to what you do during a su'udah, during a meal. Here's one of the examples. The Mishnah goes through many. Now, by the way, just to be fair, we're not going to go through every single debate. There are hundreds of debates between Hillel and Shammai, and Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. But what we are going to do is we're going to pick a few which are exemplary of a particular worldview. Okay, so here we are. Here's the machlekes. Beis Shammai omrim shebara ma'or ha'esh, and Hashem created the fire. Notice singular. And Beis Hillel omrim boirei ma'orei ha'esh, which we say and love every Motzei Shabbos. Hashem creates the fires. Okay, so the nusach of Birkas Borei Ma'orei Ha'esh is a matter of debate between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. What is at stake? The Gemara a daf or 2 later says, here we are, let's go look for that. Elo Amar Rav Yosef explained, Bebara ubeboire boire kule amaloi pligi debara mashma. Don't focus on the words bara or boire. He created in the past or creates in the present. That's not what the debate is about. Keep pligi. Where is the argument? B'ma'ar ub'ma'ire. Where the fire is viewed in the singular or where the fire is viewed in the plural. Okay. The Beis Shammai Sabri Chada Nuhura Ika Benura. Beis Shammai says when you look at fire, it's one fire, whereas Beis Hillel Sabri Tuva Nuhuri Ika Benura. When you look at a fire, there's many different parts to a fire. What does that mean? Rashi explains the different colors. When you look at a fire, there's the white part and the orange part and the red part, sometimes even a green part, depending on how hot your fire is and spectrum of heat. Okay, fantastic. Machlokes is, do we look at fire as a single unit, or do we look at fire as multiple parts? That's debate number one. Now remember, folks, while we're talking about this, in the back of our minds, we should be thinking about Rosh Chodesh Shvat or Tu B'Shvat. Right? Fire, trees. We're hoping the two don't mix. What is going on over here? What's the machlokes over here? Let's go on to the next stage. Very famous machlokes over here. Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel. Neros Chanukah. The Gemara tells us that there are 3 tiers of lighting Chanukah candles. Tier number 1 is that every house has one candle for one night, which means to say, you look in the window, day 7, there's one candle for one house. Tier number 2, what's called mahadran, a better level, is that it's not one candle per house, it's one candle per person. So you look in the window, there's 5 people in the house, there's going to be 5 candles every night of Chanukah. And then the level which we know we're appreciative of, called mahadran min mahadran. The fascinating side point question, just for homework, is why is that in Chanukah that the norm has become the mahadran min mahadran? Why is it that Chanukah is the excessive in a certain sense? There's something fascinating about this. Why Chanukah adopts that? But in the 3rd level, there's a debate. And this is the debate over here, between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Let's take a quick look. It says over here, second line. Second line, it says, Beis Shammai oimrim. Beis Shammai would say, Yom Rishon madlik shmona mikan va'elach poiches v'hoyle. So Beis Shammai would say, day 1 is 8 candles, day 2 is 7 candles, 6, all the way, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. However, Beis Hillel oimrim, Beis Hillel would say, Yom Rishon madlik achas, mikan va'elach moisli v'hoyle. Beis Hillel, as we know, and we do, and we practice, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Debate as to candles going up or candles going down. That's the machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. Fascinating. The Gemara gives a few options as to why that is. Ula suggests the following. He quotes Rabbi Yehud, Rabbi Yossi bar Avid, and Rabbi Yossi bar Zavida, and he says that time to Beis Hillel keneged Yom HaMenichnasim, but time to Beis Hillel the Beis Shammai keneged Yom HaMenichnasim, but time to Beis Hillel keneged Yom HaMenichnasim. Do you focus on the days going in, the days going out? Okay, fascinating. So we have a machlokes Beis Hillel Beis Shammai about going up or going down. Let's recap. Tu B'Shvat, Rosh Chodesh Shvat. One machlokes. Machlokes. Many fires, one fire. Next stage. Are the candles going up, the candles going down? Okay, let's add to this. Next case. Let's take a look at forgotten manuals. Now we move into a completely different arena. This is the arena which is talking about the halachas which govern agriculture. One of the mitzvahs that we have the opportunity of doing, and thankfully being a resident in an agricultural society in the land of Israel, we've had the opportunity of coming back to this. For centuries we were urban, we were ghettoed individuals, we were ghetto populations. When we moved back to agriculture, these mitzvahs became accessible to us. One of the mitzvahs is called shichucha. Shichucha literally means forgetting. Okay, it's the only mitzvah you can do by not thinking about it. Okay, so what happens is you've gathered all your grain into piles, and you as the farmer are now going around the field, you put it all onto the wagon, and you come back. At the end of the day, you look back and you say, oi, I left that pile in the corner. I left that pile over there. I didn't see it. I forgot about it. Halacha is, can you go get it? No, you can't go get it because that's called shichucha. That is now, it belongs to the aniyim. It's one of the 3 mitzvahs, leka shichucha per, which apply to the gathering process of the field and what the aniyim are entitled to. Fascinating. So here we go. Here's the debate about Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. The Mishnah says in Perek Vav in Peah, Kol oimrei hasadeh shal kav ve'echad shal avaras kavim v'shachucha. What's going on over here? You have in the field all the piles of a regular size. The size is a kav. A kav is a particular measure of grain. So if you're to go across this field and you're to look at this field, you'd see a regular size of pile. However, one pile happens to be the space of 4 kav. It's a mega pile. Okay? So the question is the following. What happens if you forget the mega pile? Right? So if you bring in all the small piles and you forgot the mega pile, which is now the size of 4. Extra kicker in this is that in the later mission in Peah, Beis Shammai says that if you're to forget 4 piles next to each other, that's considered not shichucha, because obviously there's a reason you left it there, right? meaning 4 piles is too much of a forget. To say that you really, really forgot that, is to say that you can go back.
Too substantial.
Too substantial. So what happens is the following. What happens if I have 1 pile, but it's the size of 4 piles? What's the halacha? Beis Shammai says, Eino shichcha. We look at it as if it really is 4 piles. It looks like 1 pile, but it really is the space of 4 piles. Why do I call it 4 piles? Because look around the rest of the field. What's the capacity of each pile? 1 kav. This one is 4 kav. So clearly it's the outlier, and we look at it as 4 piles, not shichcha. Beis Hillel says no, it is shichcha. By the way, let's just take a quick stop over here. Who's more machmir? Hillel's being more machmir. He's saying you can't go out to your field to get your pile. Beis Shammai is saying no, you can get it. It's not shichcha. By the way, just to point out, this is an example over here. Beis Shammai is more makil in this particular case. Okay, one debate. So the debate is about whether you look at a conglomerate pile. Do you see it as 1 or 4? Is it 1 pile or is it 4 piles massed together? More than that, the next mission tells us the following, completely separate case. What happens if the pile that you left in the field is a pile that's left next to something which is unique? So you leave it next to a haystack, you leave it next to your cattle, you leave it next to your kalim, right? So it's not just any pile, it's not the one left in that corner, it's left next to something. Do you say it's a simon? What's a simon for, Barbara?
To remind you to take
Maybe you're going to remember. So at this point in time, do you remember? No, you forgot it. But the point if you left it next to something, you're obviously going to come back for. So Beis Shammai says, in this particular case, Eino shichcha. You're going to come back for it. There's a reason you left it next to your, let's say, your plow, or whatever else it is. Beis Hillel, Irim, shichcha. Too bad, still shichcha. Again, Beis Hillel is machmir over here. Okay? Another example. Now you think, oh wow, this is really stretching us because, okay, candles, fire, Tu B'Shvat, but agriculture, what is going on over here? What is the common theme? Let's go a little further. Two more very fascinating cases. The next is the following. This is a very fascinating debate. The Torah tells us the following. The Torah tells us that there's certain money or there's certain items which are simply not appropriate to bring in the Beis HaMikdash. Why? Because they were used for really inappropriate activities. So for instance, the example is what happens if an Esnan Zona means to say that this is the payment that a person offered to a woman of the night, and this let's say what was offered as payment was money or grain or whatever else it was, some sort of barter. That item itself can never be used in the Beis HaMikdash. It's not appropriate, right? Right. So the question is the following. There's a debate in the Gemara in Baba Kama. Samachayim is the following. What happens if? And now again, the Gemara is not talking about the practicalities of whether this really occurs. Mm-hmm. The Gemara is talking about the logical parameters of this over here, which is what we're focusing on. The machlok is the following. What happens if you have? By the way, the other option is a mechir kelev. Mechir kelev is you sell your dog. So can you use the mat? Now we all have our dogs and everything, but in the end of the day. That's not really appropriate to be bringing into the Beis HaMikdash. That value or that grain or that barter, whatever it is. So let's say this mechir kelev, this esnan zona, whatever it was used for an activity which is deemed subpar activity, is now transmuted or processed into something else. So what happens if you take the olives that were used as a payment and you squash them into oil? You take the grain, you process that grain. Can you bring the byproduct into the Beis HaMikdash? Meaning to say, do you view this as a new entity or not? So actually the option is not bittul, but rather the machlokes is shinui. Can shinui is shinui koine is technically the terms we use. Does change affect a new entity? So Beis Shammai says, Titania nosano la beis nona chitin v'ason soles. What happens if the object used was wheat and you made it into flour? Zeisim v'ason shemen. Olives and you turned it into oil. Anovim v'ason yain. Grapes and they were turned into wine. Tani chada asur, tani chada mutter. There's a machlokes whether it's mutter or asur. Amar Rav Yosef, Tani gurion de Masburg. So Gurion of Masburg said, Beis Shammai oisrim, Beis Hillel matirim. So the machlokes is Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Yes, exactly. Can you use it on a Kaddish level? This is the machlokes. So Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel say whether shinu is koine. That's a very interesting and fascinating machlokes, where the shinu is koine is dependent on this machlokes Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, and they actually learn it from the words over here, because is it heim gam do you say that the word is hey v'lo shinu yehem? Does the way the pasuk says them Is it excluding them and their changes or not? This is a machlokes in the way it's over in the pasuk. Why is this relevant to halacha? Whoops. Let's go out of this over here. Here we are. Why is it relevant to halacha? Because the same machlokes applies itself on a more practical level. What happens if a person, hopefully it's not practical on a for anybody in the room, but let's say a person steals something, and now what one stole was, let's say, grain, and now one processes that grain into flour. And now one feels a sense of terrible conscience and wants to give back in return, or the police capture the person, whichever way it comes. And now the time comes for retribution. So what do? You need to pay back the money. So what do you pay back? I now have fine flour. So what do I do? Do I give back the flour, or do I say, no, the processing means that it's now mine. I'll give back the value of the grain that I stole, but in the end of the day, the flour's mine. I put effort into that. I changed it. It's a new item. I didn't steal from you flour. I stole from you grain. Right? Same machlokes over here. And again, Beis Shammai basically will argue whether or not you say shino yus koine. Do you say that the change made it into a new item, or do you say no, it's a byproduct of the original item or not? Okay, just really an adaptation of what we just saw about processed products. This is processed products too. So here we have it, folks. These are not all the cases. We're going to do a few afterwards. But here's some of the cases. So let's do a quick recap. We have Tu B'Shvat being Rosh Chodesh Le'elados on 15 or 1. Okay, that was what we started with. Then we talked about 5 particular cases. Case number 1, whether we view Borei Me'orei Ha'esh or Borei Me'orer Ha'esh. Then we talked about Chanukah candles going up or going down. Then we talked about forgotten bundles. What happens if you put if it's a mega bundle, which you view as individual bundles or not? Or another example is you leave a bundle next to your plow, next to your cattle, and you're going to come back to it for it. And then we talked about Shino Kone, whether we say that a change affects, we'll call it a unique status on the item. That's some of the examples that I like to say. So what do you say now? You can't say Beis Shammai is always machmir, right? Because Beis Shammai is not always machmir. But what can you say? I mean, these are so disparate. These are so far across the board. There's very little to say, right? And that's what I would have thought. Any takers just before we go further?
Something about holism is the whole greater than some of its parts is equal to quite.
Okay, so Dr. Yates is pointing out a very good point that there seems to be a notion of whole and parts.
Gestaltisch.
That's really a very good point. I mean, the bundle, the parts, right? The whole process.
Multiple fire components.
That's very interesting.
Inclusive or individual?
Inclusive or individual, right? So we're going in the right direction, but it's a little more than that. We're going in the right direction. This is a very fascinating debate. So we as individuals, we as I will call us pedestrians in Judaism, may not necessarily, I'm including myself, and I would say most people alive today, would look at this and say, well, there's a lot of mathematics, and we're going to get in the right direction. But here, let's turn to a person who's actually on a different plane. His name is Rav Shlomo Yosef Zevin. Okay, so Rav Shlomo Yosef Zevin was the most remarkable personality of the last century. He was born in the late 1800s, and he is very unique in many, many ways. He got his smicha, just to give you a sense. He got his smicha from Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, so that's the Frierdiker Rebbe. He also got his smicha from the Rogatchover Gaon and the Rabbi Yechiel Michal Epstein, the author of the Rogatchover. So we're talking about a person who was really the predominant European Gadol. He was also unique in the sense that not only was the Rav of the town at a very young age, and he was a very unique person. He sat on Ukrainian parliament in the early 20s when they had their brief span of independence. He was one of the editors of a Torah journal with Rav Yechezkel Abramsky, and was jailed in the communist era, in the early communist era for dispersing Torah. He moved in the 30s to Israel and became a predominant religious Zionist. In a sense, he was a huge Torah personality and a supporter of the state of Israel. And in fact, he is the original author in 1947 of the first volume of Encyclopedia Talmudics. Okay, so what we have today, we have to 36 volumes, and we had Rav Steinberg. He was the first person to start this. He has a number of unbelievable svarim, Moadim Ba'alacha, which is really a go-to. He goes through the year and all the halachas. He has Ishim V'Shittos, so he takes people like the Rogatchover Gaon, his Rebbe, and he gives a biography, a halachic biography of where they are. I get all my reminders on here, so you can tell me what I'm missing as it's happening. If anyone wants to text me in any surprises, you're welcome to send them in, and we'll see them happy come in right at the top over there. So Rav Zevin is really a remarkable personality in many ways. He was very close to the Frierdiker Rebbe, and when he was instrumental in convincing the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the last Lubavitcher Rebbe, to become the Lubavitcher Rebbe at the time. He was a very, very interesting person. Schooled in Litvish yeshivas with Hasidic thoughts. One of his books is Hasidic Tales. Your dad translated that, yes. Ricky's father translated his book on Hasidic Tales, which is a 2-volume, which we thankfully have in the house thanks to Ricky, which is a beautiful description. He really across the gamut. And one of the books that he writes is a book which is called L'or HaHalacha, in the light of halacha. And in it he has many essays. One essay which you're probably most familiar with is an essay called Mishpat Shylock, where what he does is he takes the Merchant of Venice of Shakespeare and he says, is it even true? Could it ever have been that Shylock would have demanded a pound of flesh? And he has an incredibly long essay discussing that. Very, very fascinating. And he has, in addition to that, maybe one day we'll get to do that, the Merchant of Venice essay. Very fascinating. He's a very eclectic individual. But what he does is he has a short essay called L'Shitos Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. And he says, in fact, there is a common ground which sails through all of them. So let's take a look at what Rav Zeman himself says. Really a fascinating individual. Here we go. So this is a little bit of the background. Here we are. Okay. So this is just really his thesis area over here. And I'd like to just focus on some of the words that Rav Zeman says. So we're going to just do a little bit of this paragraph and get a sense of where he's going. I'm starting on the second line over here. Ruban. It says, Ruban hagadol shel oisan halachos and b'gzeros shel chachamim. He notices that the machlokes of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, generally speaking, not the cases we did so much, are about gzeros. Right? Gzera is a decree where the chachamim introduced, we'll call it a parameter around where they wanted to protect the concept. Okay, so there's usually a machlokes in Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, a siyag, a parameter of protection for the idea. So Beis Hillel metzamtzim and Moisai. So and in those cases, Beis Shammai is in fact usually machmir. And Beis Hillel is a little more relaxed and isn't machmir in those cases. Mat chunosa shel gzera bichlal. What is the concept of a gzera in the first place? He says, Ein gozrim stam isur al ezer davar. Ela im kein yesh makom lachshosh shemitoch davar ze yavol gam lidei isur kamor. When do you make a gzera? You say the following. Look. There's a particular activity you're involved in. Is the activity itself bad? Not really. But we know psychologically that by doing this activity, you're going to probably, potentially, get to another activity which is negative. Right? So therefore we're going to make a parameter, don't do this activity. Example being, just a classic example, muktzah. Okay, so muktzah is gzeira midrabanan on many levels. Some argue that some of it is actually maybe more than that. But nonetheless, we're going to put a parameter around moving a pen because handling a pen may lead to writing with a pen, which is an Isur D'Oraisa. That's an example of a gzera. Okay. The real Isur, the real McCoy is not in front of us right now. This item, this activity, is your gateway into that. This neutral activity right now isn't necessarily bad itself, but it has the potential of leading to something which is negative. In this action, there is potential for negativity. Which can lead to something negative. Beis Shammai, Beis Shammai wants to clean the world from any even, we'll call it, just tastes or reflections of negativity. Wants to eradicate even potential pitfalls, potential arrivals at negativity. Machmirim Yosef Gzeros are therefore more machmir in the case of Gzeros because he wants to eradicate the potential for leading to negativity. Beis Hillel says no. In front of us, it's neutral. We're not going to think about all potentialities, all options. We're going to look at it right now, here and now. And that's where we're going to stop. And there's no problem right now. So it's going to be a little more lax when it comes to Gzeros. So what he goes on to say is, he says, I want to take this as a proof. The difference between Bekoyach, which is our potential, and Befoil, which is in our action, is going to be the underlying principle between many halachas in Beis Hillel and Shammai. Beis Shammai magbitim al adover k'vi mashu adayin koyach. Beis Shammai always looks at the potential of something. Beis Hillel mashkivin lo b'chilas yitzios l'pal. And Beis Hillel always says, Beis Hillel says, look, we're looking at what it actually is. And he goes on to say this. And by the way, what I did not bring, but in the next paragraph he says, very humbling, he says, I'm not telling you that this is going to explain all cases of Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, because not all of them are talking about potential and actual. And also, I'm not telling you that all the cases I'm bringing to you are going to be the ironclad example of it. Put together, you may see that some are stronger, some are less strong, but they exemplify this. So let's go back for just a quick second, okay? Let's see if I can go back on this in this particular way. Yes, I can go back. Side swiping this way. Okay, there we go.
If it's supposed to follow that,
So-
it's poker.
So poker is
reducing the potential.
We're reducing the potential here. So here we go. Let's take a look at our 5 cases quickly for a moment. Borim Aish and Borim Ori Aish. The Vilna Gaon on his Pirush called Shnois Eliyahu on this Gemara, on this mission actually, says the following. Let's try to understand this. There's a machlokes over here about Borim Ori Aish or Borei Ori Aish. Says the Vilna Gaon a very fascinating insight, a very incisive insight. Really on Rosh Hashanah, the bracha Borim Ori Aish in general is a bracha. What type of bracha is it? What's the function of that bracha? So that's our loch. It should be close to that, but what type of bracha is it? What are we expressing? What type of feeling are we expressing? Shabbat, gratitude, appreciation of the fact that God endowed us with fire, right? Unlike the monkeys who don't have the red flower, we have ability to access fire, right? So, and it said the Medrash tells us that it was on Motzei Shabbos that Adam was endowed with the capabilities of getting to fire in the first place, which is why on Motzei Shabbos we actually light the candles on our Havdalah. What is Beis Shammai saying? Beis Shammai is saying we're thanking and appreciating Hashem the notion, the concept of fire, which means to say God gave us the concept of fire, which is bara in the past tense, ma'ar ha'esh, the idea of fire. Whatever expresses itself, spark plugs, electricity, whatever else it is in later generations, that's fun. I'm not talking about applications. I'm talking about the original potential which was given. What's Beis Hillel saying? Sheboirei ma'ari ha'esh. This week, you know how many applications I'm using with fire? You know, thank God, when the temperature is in the low 30s, I'm using fire because I have a gas heater in my basement, maybe an oil heater, and I was using fire to be able to heat my house. That's one application of it. Boirei, he creates Ma'arei ha'esh, all the different applications of fire. Are you looking at the concept, or are you looking at the applications? The potential or the actual? That's what the Vilna Gaon says in understanding that Mishnah. Let's go to Chanukah for a second. This is remarkable. What happens in Chanukah? In Chanukah, there's a miracle where a certain amount of oil lasted 8 days. So let's look at this. In potential, when is the potential of the miracle at its greatest? On the first day. Because on the first day, there's a potential of this oil now lasting 8 days. Whereas in actuality, when is the miracle increasing? Every day, it actually increases. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of, in physics, the conservation of energy. The theory of conservation of energy. So for example, let's say you take an object, and you hold it up here. Every object has a particular amount of potential and kinetic energy. Right now, there's a certain amount of potential energy, which is measured, which is a function of its height, so now I'll give it more potential energy because it's over the floor. As it falls, as an object falls, there is an interchange where the conservation of total energy remains the same, but potential energy is decreasing, and kinetic energy, which is energy of movement, is increasing. The two always add up to the same thing because that's the rule of conservation of energy. Now, happens to be that this is exactly what Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai are saying. This is the original conservation of energy idea. What Beis Shammai is saying is the potential of the miracle is decreasing. Beis Shammai, that's what Beis Shammai says. Beis Hillel is saying that's true, but the actuality of the miracle is increasing. So that at the same time, it's the object almost falling, losing potential, increasing kinesis. That's what's going on in the machlokes over here. Fascinating. The same idea, potential, actual. He put this in a footnote. He wasn't as sure about this one, but I think it's an unbelievable point. Let's go further. Forgotten bundles. Let's take a look back into the bundles over here. Here you have a big bundle which is the size of 4, because the rest of the field are the same smaller cut. What do? The machlokes is, do you look at this big bundle and say, right in, we look at this as if it is divided into 4 or not? Beis Shammai says, I'm looking at the potential of the whole thing. The rest of the field is in pieces, so I'm going to look at this as 4 pieces together. It looks like one bundle in actuality, but potentially I know it's 4 because that's what you do with the rest of the field. Beis Hillel says, no, you don't look at the potential in this. It's a bundle. It's one bundle. It's a big bundle, but it's a bundle. So therefore, that's considered shircha. The same thing. When a person puts it next to his plowshare, he leaves the bundle behind his plowshare. Is at this very moment he remembering it? The answer is, no, he forgot it. That's why it's in the field. But the fact that you put it there means to say potentially you really wanted to remember it. At this point in time, you're not remembering it. But the fact you put it there means potentially you know you're going to come back for it. Of course you're going to get your plowshare at the end of the day. You don't want to leave that out in the rain. So the point is that you've now created the potential, even though that isn't actualized right now. So Beis Shammai says, of course that's not Shechla, you're going to come back to it, even though you don't know it not right now. Beis Hillel says, no, actually, you forgot it. If somebody were to ask you, do you have all your grain? The answer would be yes. So you forgot it. That's it. Right now, you forgot it. That's what Beis Hillel is saying. Machlokes is again our process products, whether it comes to Esnan Zona, whether it comes to Shinokone, whether it comes to stolen objects being returned. When I look at an olive, do I look at the olive as anything the olive can become? Or do I look at the olive as what it is? Beis Hillel say, look, at the end of the day, an olive is an olive. So once I've squeezed it and now it's in a bottle, it's not an olive anymore. Beis Shammai says, no, but incorporated into the olive was the potential to become olive juice or olive oil. Right? That's the way I look at it. So incorporated into the object itself is all potentialities of what it could express. Is that fascinating? That's why Shinui is not according to Beis Shammai, but it is according to Beis Hillel. Right? Fascinating. How much you look at the potential and the actual. Let's take it further. Let's take a few more examples here quickly. Just to see just the brilliance of this explanation. Here we go. Let's take five cases here. 5 quick cases. We're going to do it very, very briefly. Okay? We need pictures, folks. There we go. Fantastic. Good. Case 6. So here we go. Here's the machlokes. There's machlokes in the Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis. A Mishnah actually. The Mishnah says the following. So we're not going to do it inside, but just in potential, just look through these Mishnahs. Here's the machlokes. There's machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Can you leave wool to dye on Erev Shabbos? So I'm going to take my white wool, I'm going to put it into my tcheles, I'm going to put it into my argamon, I'm going to put it into whatever my color is that I want to do, and I'm leaving it on Erev Shabbos. So Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai argue. Beis Shammai says, you can't do that unless you're absolutely sure that the dyeing process will have finished before Shabbos. Whereas Beis Hillel says, no, it's fine. Even if it's going to be into Shabbos, you can leave the wool to dye. This and the Gemara debates what's really going on over here. This gets into the very complicated sugya of what's called shvesas kelim. Can your property be doing work for you? Inanimate property. Can your inanimate property be doing work for you on Shabbos? That's what the Gemara in the Bible says. The Yerushalmi goes to another level and says, no, it's not about whether your kelim can be doing malacha for you. It's that Beis Shammai understands that when it says you should do all your work on the 6 days, it means to say that your work should be finished during those 6 days. You can't have the work extending into Shabbos. Okay, now very fascinating debate. La halacha, very complex sugya. But now, what's going on here? Says Rav Zevin, think about this for a second. I'm now putting, at this point in time, at 10:13 a.m. on Friday morning, I'm taking the wool and I'm putting it into the pot. At this point in time, have I violated Shabbos? No, because right now it's not Shabbos. But if it takes 13 hours for this to be able to be dyed, therefore at this moment in time, in potentiality, I'm creating an action which will continue into Shabbos. Is it an Issur D'Oraisa? No. But it says Beis Shammai, it's as if potentially you're being Machal al Shabbos. So I can't do that. Beis Hillel says, right now, it's Friday. Forget the potential. Right now, it's Friday. So that's the machlokes over here, says Rav. Another example. Preparing for Shabbos. This is the flip side of the coin. Famous debate. Not about Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, but Shammai and Hillel themselves. Here's the story. They said about Shammai that he would be walking into a gourmet glut on a Monday morning, and he'd see the most unbelievable cut of meat. So what would he do? He'd immediately go and buy it and put it in his freezer and earmark it for Shabbos. But then on Tuesday, when he was just going to get those, the pickles that his wife forgot, so she sent him into the store, he sees an even better cut. So what does he do? He goes and buys that for Shabbos. Meaning to say, his entire life was geared towards Shabbos. Whereas Hillel himself, they said, had a different way of doing things. He'd find a great cut on Monday, and he'd have a good steak meal on Monday night. He'd enjoy it, and he'd say, Baruch Hashem Yom Yom, I enjoy Hashem's blessing every day. I'm sure that Shabbos will find something better for Shabbos when it comes. I'm not looking at, it's not like as longitudinally my whole week is moving towards Shabbos. Every day I'm viewing the blessings of God on this particular day. This is the opposite side of the dyeing the wool. You see this? Meaning if I can say that Chilul Shabbos can begin on a Friday, then Oineg Shabbos can also begin on a Monday. Right? If you think about that. Because the Shabbos, the potential of sanctifying Shabbos has begun once the week began. Sunday morning, Yom Rishon LeShabbos. I'm starting to count again towards Shabbos. Why? Because the potential is in the air. Fascinating. This is actually the flip side of this Gemara in Beit Tesai. Another example. Examples Ma'aser Sheni in Yerushalayim. Here's the halacha. In general, Ma'aser Sheni is one of the tithes that a person gives in particular years in the 7-year cycle. Not all years. And you remember that when you have, if you're a farmer and you have grain, there's a few things you need to do to it. Number one, you need to give truma to the kohen. Then you need to give ma'aser to the Levi. The Levi has responsibility of his Meiser, giving a little bit to the Kohen, Meiser, no Meiser. Okay. Then, above and beyond that, there is either Meiser Ani, which is an extra tithe given to the poor, or an extra tithe given to Meiser Sheni. What is Meiser Sheni? Is the bit of grain that you need to take to eat in Yerushalayim. However, there are options as to what to do with that. You could either take that grain and eat it in Yerushalayim, or you could redeem it onto money, which I'll spend later on in Yerushalayim when I go up for Shavuos, and I will eat it in my home, right? But the point is, the Kedusha of that grain has to go onto money, or it has to be eaten in Yerushalayim. That's the halacha of Meiser Sheni. You can imagine in those days what the tax forms would look like, right? So there's the deduction for Truma, there's the Meiser deduction, has the Levi filled in his, I-33 on the Meiser and Meiser, and then what kind of year is it? The accountants, the billing must be very fascinating, depending on how much grain you bought in every year. This is what was going on. So anyway, so what happens is the following: can you redeem any grain? Meaning, it's hard. Let's say I produce however many tons of produce. I'm not bringing the Meiser Sheni of all that into Yerushalayim. It's just not possible. I don't have enough time to eat that all in Yerushalayim at the time that I'm spending in Yerushalayim. So what do I do? So you can redeem it. However, there's an exception. You can't redeem something which was brought into Yerushalayim. So let's say I take the Meiser Sheni, bring it with me to Yerushalayim, and I say, it would be actually simple if I just exchange this for money, and I'll use the money, to buy flowers in Yerushalayim or to go spend time at the Inbal or wherever else it is, right? It doesn't work. Why? Because you brought it into Yerushalayim. So here's the machlokes. What happens if, instead of bringing in my Meiser Sheni, I bring in my whole grain? So I happen to be a rather small farmer. I only have one little field. I harvest the entire field. I bring all the grain in a wagon to Yerushalayim. So have I separated Meiser Sheni yet? No. So the Meiser Sheni is somewhere in there, but it hasn't been separated yet. Neither is the Truma, neither is the Meiser. Okay? Now I'm walking and I take that wagon and I drive it through Yerushalayim. What's the halacha? Can I redeem the Meiser Sheni, which is going to be taken out afterwards? That's the matter. That's the debate. Beis Shammai says you can't. It's Yerushalayim, the mechitzos or koltos. Yerushalayim, so to speak, grabbed that Meiser. It now has to be eaten in Yerushalayim. Whereas Beis Hillel says no, you can redeem it afterwards after you take it out. What's the machlokes? What's the underlying root over here? So Mora Makos says a very simple thing. Do you say matnos sheloi hurmu kamishu hurmu damyan? Do you say that when I look at this pile of grain, which is right now tevel, it is untied produce, and I know that if I had to color code it, it would be a little bit of red, a little bit of green, a little bit of blue, for all the different things that need to be taken out. Do I say that I look at it as if they have been tied already, and the mechitzos of Yerushalayim absorbed each of the maestros, and therefore it is now no longer available to redemption? Or do I say no? All this grain is simply tevel. Until you actually separate it, it's not Meiser Sheni yet. It's really regular, untied grain. I can take it in, I can take it out, I can take it in, I can take it out, and when I separate it, then I can redeem it. That's what happens. What's the machlokes? Whether you look at the potential of separation or not. That's what Beis Shammai is saying. Another example of this over here. What happens if this is a more interesting case? What happens if you have a person, you have a woman who's married and a man who potentially commits infidelity, and so she's brought by her husband for in the case of Soita to the Beis Hamikdash. And what happens is the husband dies before she's tested. So what happens over here? In a case where Rahman al-Insan, there's a husband would die in marriage, what is the woman entitled to? She's entitled to collect the ksuba. What we read in the chuppah is a legal document that in the case of divorce or widowhood, Rahman al-Insan, the husband owes the wife a certain amount of money, which is has a lien on his property. Good. That's how it works. So what about this woman? Does she have the rights to her husband's property as the ksuba? So it happens to be a machlokes. And somebody would say that, look, she can get the ksuba, she can take it. She has the shtar, she's still married to him, so she has the lien on his property. She can extract it from his inheritors. Too bad, either we're in the middle of a process of, or a debate as to whether they're really still married or not. That's fine. She can still collect. Beis Hillel says no. Either she drinks to prove the veracity of the relationship, that she did not in fact commit adultery, or she can get the ksuba, but not both. Why? Because this marriage right now is in a case of safek. The question was, were they really married because of what happened on the side or not? And until she can prove that, she can't collect the ksuba. What's at stake over here? So here's the way it works. And the Gemara explains the following: a very, very fascinating debate. This is how it works. The halacha. What is a shtar? What is an illegal document entitle you? The Gemara says that the way Beis Shammai looks at it is, a shtar is viewed, when she has the lien on his property, it's as if, who's holding on to that property? She is. Because even though she hasn't collected it yet, we view it as if she is about to collect it, and therefore it's almost as if the property is in her hands. Now there's a suffix. We don't know, is she married or is she not married, right? So what's the rule in a case of suffix? What's the legal parameter? What's the regular rule when we don't know what to do and money's in doubt? We say the money stays in the place it always was. Those who want to extract new, bring where is the land? Where is the money according to the Beis Shammai? In her possession, because she has the shtar. Anything which stands to be collected is already collected. So she has the rights to it. Whereas Beis Hillel says, no, we don't say she may have the shtar, but actually who's sitting on the property is his inheritors. Right? He's dead now, but his inheritors are now holding onto the property. She's the one who needs to extract it from them. And she doesn't have proof because there's a suffix. So the question is, who's muchsak? Who's the person who has the rights to this property? Again, are you looking at the shtar, the potential of the collection, or are you saying, well, actually it wasn't collected? Same machlokes. Last case, and over here. And this is the following. The Mishnah in Uktzin, Perek Gimel Ches, asks the following. When do fish become Tamei Mesim? Meaning, when is it that fish become impure? What point do we consider them dead? So the machlokes. Beis Shammai says, Mishi Yotsudu, from the time they're caught in the net. Whereas Beis Hillel Omrim, Mishi Yamusu, from the time they actually die. Now it happens to be there's usually only a few short minutes between them. But what happens if you have a fish which is still flapping and it touches something? Is it matame or not? That's the machlokes. Where again, what's the machlokes? Potential or actual. When it's in the net, we know what's happening to it. It ain't going anywhere, right? But at the end of the day, says Beis Hillel, until it's actually dead, it's not dead. Similarly, and the next Mishnah says a similar kind of thing. When is honey? Honey is one of the 7 liquids which acts as a machshir for tumah, which can transfer tumah through it. When is the honey considered honey that's separated from the hive? So the machlokes is Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel says from the time you steam out, you smoke out the bees. And Beis Hillel says no, from the time that actually you crack it open and you take it out. Meaning, again, the first or the second stage. Once again, potential and actual. So what Rav Zon does, and he does other cases, but they're more complicated. What he does is, these are just 10 cases we've seen over here, potential or actual. The application is unbelievable because it's across the parameters, across disciplines in halacha and machshava. Let's take it one step further over here. What about Tu B'Shvat and Rosh Chodesh Shvat now? That was what we started. What's the Shvat debate? So it happens to be, the Gemara explains in Rosh Hashanah that Beis Shammai says, in the end of the day, most of the rains in Israel have finished falling by Rosh Chodesh Shvat, meaning to say, all the potential for growth has arrived. Whereas Beis Hillel says, we don't focus on all the rains finishing, but we focus on the fact that the sap actually starts flowing on Tu B'Shvat. Potential, actual. More than that, if you want to take it further. It happens to be they're 14 days away from each other, and the 14 days are very important in terms of the moon cycle. Where is the moon right now? If we look up outside, where is the moon? You can barely see it. Why? Because at this point in time, the moon is only in the state of potential. At the full moon, at Tu B'Shvat, on the 15th of the month, that's when it's in its full glowing glory. Which means to say that not only is the machlokes about the state of original change or not, but the point of the trees, but it's even in fact a symbol in the month itself, the stages of the month. The potential to become bigger or actually being bigger or not is where they hold. Here's the kicker. This is a very famous statement. We're not going to read it inside in the future. Here's why it's so interesting. There is a famous example that the Arizal says is quoted in the Mikdash Melech and later on by Rosh Shneur Zaman Liadi, who says a famous statement by the Arizal. I thought it was earlier, I didn't realize this. The Arizal 15 says, Al Mishnah Zu. He quotes the Mishnah in Perek Yavos. The Mishnah says, Kol machlokes shehi l'shem shamayim, soif aliyis kayim. Any machlokes which is for the sake of heaven is going to have longevity. And the example it gives is Hillel and Shammai. But that doesn't make sense because at the end of the day, Shammai was voted down. Shammai was almost, with the exception of 18 cases, was voted down in almost every single case. So what do you mean soif aliyis kayim? That's not fair. He's not getting soif aliyis kayim, says Arizal. No. In the future, in the days of Mashiach, we're going to actually paskin like Beis Shammai. What does the Arizal mean? Says Rav Zevin. The point is that in the reality we live with now, we have to live in a Beis Hillel reality. We live with what's in front of us. We don't have the scope, we don't have the ability to be able to understand the depths of perception that Beis Shammai had. We deal with what's in front of us. there'll come a time in the future where we'll be able to appreciate not just what is, but what could be as well. That's the Neshama of the future. Last thoughts for the day today, and with this we'll end. Now we're coming just a little on the edge of time. I apologize. Here's the fact. Here's how it goes. It happens to be that we're also at an interesting point in change. Why? Because now we've entered into the set of parashios which are called in Hasidic literature Shovavim, Shmois, Va'era, Boy, Shalach. Right. So all the parashas over here are in what's called the Shovim, and some say Shovim Tat, which is a time of repentance in midwinter, where there's a lot of period of change. There's some people who used to fast during this time. There's special things that a person learns during this time. What happens over here? So I heard Rav Rosner quote a very fascinating source. He quotes Halekach V'Alibov of Rav Shor, who says a very interesting thing. He says it's interesting that Rosh Chodesh Shvat is always around the time of Shovim. Okay, so Rosh Chodesh Shvat right now is at the time of the Shovim, this time of change, of internal betterment, even in the middle of the winter. Some people liken it a little bit to the isolation nature, the capacity to change. And he says the following. What did we read a week ago? Vayakom melech chodesh al Mitzrayim asher lo yada az Yosef. Don't give me the pictures of Donald Trump right now. Just it says Vayakom melech chodesh al Mitzrayim, and melech Mitzrayim got up and who didn't know Yosef. There's a machlokes. Was it a new king? Was it a new pharaoh? Or was it the old pharaoh and he forgot? Let's assume it's the old pharaoh and he forgot. What does that mean? Here you have an individual who's living a life, the whole country's economy is based on one genius. His name was Joseph. And now you decide to, ignore the annals of history, completely close down the Joseph Museum, and forget about how the economy ran and how Egypt became the center of the world, and I'm going to turn a new leaf. Says if we as Jewish people don't take advantage of the change, the potential for change at this particular time in the year, the potential of growth, of change, then you know what? The nations of the world also take advantage of that change, but for the negativity. Melech Chodesh, he's the same guy, but at the end of the day, he doesn't know about us, he doesn't care about us. You are not capable of turning over a leaf, you're not capable of making changes in your life, then the people around you make changes in their life, apropos you. That's the way he says it. Wow, that's very powerful. More than that, that's why I said...
That's a Bet Shammai's idea.
Which is exactly how Bet Shammai's idea. Exactly. And the last thought is the following. This is quoted in a sefer called Moadim. Moadim, not by halacha, but Moadim, not Moadim Zmanim. I'm trying to remember the name of the sefer. It's called. He says a very fascinating thing, and that is that the parshas of the Shovim, Shmois, Va'era, Boy, Shalach, are all the parshas are about our lowest and our highest. Meaning Israel's went down to the very depths where we almost had ideological disapparition, if you call it that way. We almost completely lost who we were into crisis mode, to raised up to a nation to receive Torah at Har Sinai. That's the journey of Shovavim, because the point of this time of year is the potential for change. And we don't have to wait for Tu B'Shvat, says Beis Shammai, because already now, even before the sapper starts flowing, even though snow is still in the forecast, we have the ability to be able to really make that change from Rosh Chodesh Shvat. Thank you very much.